Greetings. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. So, if you've been following the book study so far, you'll know that we've covered the first 15 chapters of A Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism by Gareth Knight. And in doing so, we've gone over in detail all 10 of the Sephirah, including the veils of non-existence. So now we're going to continue and see what more this author has to share with us about the Tree of Life. And then we'll be finished with the first book. Now there's a second book that goes more into detail specifically on the paths of the tree, which is a whole nother study in itself. As a matter of fact, I think that book might be just a little bit thicker. But let's stay focused on today. Today we're going to read 2 chapters because they're about half the size of what we normally do. And these are going to deal a little bit more with the relationships behind the Sephirah themselves. So, I hope all is well with you and your study and practice is going splendidly, because it certainly is for me. Ready to go. So we'll turn this camera around. We've now entered the last part, which is part 3. Greetings, Shadow Book. All right, Chapter 17, The Flexibility of the Tree. We have now covered the individual Sephirah of the Tree of Life by means of a general analysis of certain of the potencies that come under the heading of each one. Basically, a Sephirah is a divine emanation, and this is the real core of the whole matter. All the attributions besides the divine names are really applications of the abstract formula of the Sephirah in various contexts. Thus, any particular attribution should not be regarded as a hard and fast ruling, for much depends upon the manner in which the Tree of Life is applied to various factors of manifestation. Flexibility of mind must always be striven for if the Tree of Life is to be used to its full potential. Flexibility of mind is a key thing. So we're not dealing with hard, fast, rigid rules. We're dealing with relationships. Even as he said up here, thus any particular attribution should not be regarded as a hard and fast ruling, for much depends upon the manner in which the Tree of Life is applied to various factors of manifestation. In other words, it completely depends upon the context. 2. Generally speaking, we have in our analysis applied the tree of life to the manifestations of our own spiritual universe, that is, with the solar logos in Kether and the material world of the solar system in Malkuth. However, Malkuth could also be applied to the whole physical plane in general, whether in the solar system or out of it. And in this way, Kether would be the sphere of the supreme God over all logoi. Or, if the Sephirah Malkuth is applied to the planet Earth only, then Kether could be the Sephirah of the planetary logos. And the microcosm, which is man, Malkuth could be taken to be the physical body, and then Kether would be a man's spirit or divine spark. 3. Thus, it will be seen that there is a tree of life in every Sephirah. For if Kether be taken to represent the high spiritual being who is the fount of all creation, or of a system of solar systems, the absolute level of Tifereth could then be ascribed to a solar logos. And the absolute level of Malkuth to a planetary ruler. But as a planetary ruler has a whole spiritual hierarchy dependent upon it, then it demands a whole tree to categorize that hierarchy, which tree would be entirely in the Malkuth of the greater tree. That's a good line, that last sentence of verse number 3. But as a planetary ruler has a whole spiritual hierarchy dependent upon it, then it demands a whole tree to categorize that hierarchy, which tree would be entirely in the Malkuth of the greater tree. So in so many words, what he's saying here is that this is a pattern that isn't a rigid or fixed place. This is a pattern that is infinite. In other words, this is a categorization of 10 levels of expression. So these 10 levels of expression can be found within any individual level. So if we zoom into the Hod aspect, we're going to see that there are also, it can be broken down into 10 levels of expression. And if we zoom into any one of those, we can also see that it also can be broken down into 10 levels of expression. As a matter of fact, if we zoom out of this tree, we can see that it very well may belong to a Sephirah, which has 10 levels of expression, and so on infinitely. In this way, we can see that the expression of reality is a fractal pattern, because while the outside appearance of a thing might not be the same, the modes of expression are limited. They can only express in so many ways. The same way that your bloodline is a fractal, infinitely backward and infinitely forward. The same genetic makeup. It expresses differently depending on the time and the environment, but the genetic coding is the exact same. The context is the same. Four. The number of ways in which the tree can be applied, then, is almost infinite, and one could say that, cosmically speaking, the whole tree of life we use as a system of mystical development is but the Malkuth of a cosmic tree. When one has attained the infinitely high state of consciousness known as union with God, one has only obtained the freedom of the lowest cosmic plane, and thus one starts off on higher cosmic evolution in the cosmic Malkuth. In other words, you could expand your capacity to be aware of the Kether of our current Malkuth. But even in that expansion of awareness, you would still only find yourself in the Malkuth of another tree, infinitely. So in other words, even if you graduate elementary school, you're only a beginner in middle school. And once you graduate middle school, you're only a beginner in high school. And once you graduate high school, you're only a beginner in college. And that's how it goes. There's only so many things to learn in school, but you're learning them at different degrees, depending on your level of understanding. Number 5. All this is really of consequence only to the advanced esoteric student, and even then, the interest can be largely only academic. For the solar logos is the conditioner and sustainer of our spiritual universe, and we can know directly nothing which is outside our logos' jurisdiction. All outside is mediated to us via the solar logos, and our prime task is evolution within this system. There will be all eternity to get to grips with the extra logoidal aspects of the cosmos when we have finally achieved our goal within this logoidal system. In other words, yes, there is all kinds of information as far as other forms of life and other systems and multiverses and all of that. It's infinite and it's all true. But the thing is, most of that information is useless to you or me because, as the Bible says, there's nothing new under the sun. Underneath the Tifereth aspect, it's a self-contained system. All the information needed for its evolution is within there. So information from other systems or other multiverses or whatever you want to call it is borderline useless to the typical individual because that data doesn't serve any evolutionary purpose. Entertaining, though. 6. However, speculation in these matters is not entirely useless, for some idea, however vague, of our cosmic destiny can act as a balancing sense of spiritual proportion when the world is too much with us. Peace naturally natured. Peace we grow natural. 8. If the 4 functions of the Jungian psychology are applied to the lower Sephiroth, they fit in well as follows. Intuition to Tifereth, feeling to Netzach, intellect to Hod, and sensation to Malkuth. Earth, fire, water, air. Alternatively, they could be aligned with the elements in Malkuth, intuition to air, feeling to water, intellect to fire, and sensation to earth. Exactly. In this case, there is a useful line of speculation in the cardinal, fixed, and mutable aspects of the 4 elemental quadrants as applied to the Jungian psychic functions. 9. On the other hand, the Jungian archetypes could be experimentally aligned with various Sephiroth, the anima to Netzach and the animus to Hod, for example. Here there is an interesting hint that the projectors of each archetype are of different sexual polarity. For Netzach is on the masculine pillar and Hod on the feminine when the glyph of the pillars is applied to the tree. Greetings, MC Maestro. Greetings, April Sunshine. He says, what to fire? Well, basically, what he's saying there is, he said, intuition to Tifereth, which would be air, feeling to Netzach, which would be fire, intellect to Hod, which would be water. Nope, hold on, let me go back. It says it right here. Intuition to air, feeling to water, intellect to fire, and sensation to earth. So intellect and fire, that would be Hod. And you know, that might be why sometimes we see the Archangel Michael aligned with Hod. That would make sense. Jay, everything, peace. Nine. On the other hand, the Jungian archetypes could be experimentally... Okay, I already read that. 10. The miraculous child would probably best be aligned with Tifereth, the wise old man, possibly with Chesed, and the shadow with Geburah. The friend could be an aspect of the holy guardian angel of Malkuth. 11. The mandala, as an integration symbol, is pretty obviously a Tifereth symbol, and using the implications of the tree, it can be visualized as a reflection of the true being in Kether, and it is found, of course, reflected in the magic mirror of the subconsciousness in Yesod. When mythological figures crop up in Jungian analysis, they can, of course, be aligned sephirotically, as has already been tentatively suggested in our examination of the Sephirah. To illustrate a further method of applying the tree, we can turn to the Eastern system of Etheric Chakras. So you're saying that the chakras exist on the etheric plane. These all apply to the etheric body and thus could be described as delineation of the tree in Yesod. Is Yesod the etheric plane? Who would have guessed it other than Travis Mages, right? Or as they have relationships with the endocrine glands in Malkuth. The Muladhara chakra, a lotus of 4 petals situated at the base of the spine, can be assigned to Malkuth. The Svadhisthana chakra, situated at the generative organs, would then be in Yesod. The Manipura and Anahata chakra, having their correspondence in the solar plexus and heart, would be applied to Tifereth, although there is a good case to be made for assigning the former to the upper ranges of Yesod. The Vishuddhu chakra of the larynx and the Ajna chakra between the eyes have been assigned to Bina and Hakma, respectively. But it is perhaps best to keep these attributions to the central Sephirah, which correspond to the upright line of the spine. They would thus unite their function as do Bina and Hakma in Doth. Finally, the Sahasrara chakra, the 1,000-petaled lotus above the head, obviously corresponds to Kether at the crown. Will Trent, peace, peace. Sparkle, greetings, greetings. Caesar, good evening. So basically what he described there is the alignment of the chakras with the tree of life. Now I do it a little bit differently, but what he just said was Muladhara, Swadhisthana, Manipura, and Anahata to the Tifereth, Vishuddhi and Ajna to Doth, but Doth being the synthesis of Hakma and Bina, and of course, obviously the crown chakra to Kether. But the way I do it, it's the same thing but simpler. We got Muladhara here with Malkuth, Yesod with Swadhisthana, Manipura would be the synthesis of Had and Netzach. Because he did the same thing up here. Why not do it across the tree? Then, of course, the heart chakra, Anahata here. The throat chakra being the synthesis of Chesed and Gibera. And the third eye chakra being the synthesis of Bina and Hakma. And then, of course, the crown with Kether. But again, even as you said just a few lines ago, this isn't about hard, fast rules. This is about relationships with each other. How does it work together in a system? 15. In all these methods of application, there are no... In all these methods of application, there are no hard and fast rules, for much depends upon the individual understanding of the person making the attributions. The suggestions put forward here are not meant to be in any way authoritative, but are mentioned merely to suggest the method by which the tree of life can be applied to non-Hebraic systems. So in so many words, he's saying here that the tree of life is a framework that can be applied across the board, no matter what system you belong to. The tree of life can be assigned, or the attributes of your belief system can be assigned to the tree of life, and it will work. He just compared not only the chakras, but also the elements, and also Carl Jung's philosophies on the personality and the soul. So really it can go across the board. You can even find this related to business structure, right? Or to family structure. It can literally be applied to every pattern that we deal with in life. That's what makes this system so perfect. 16. Also, once a good conception of the tree has been grasped by formulating what would be the mode of action of a Sephirah within a Sephirah, further subtleties can be deduced. Indeed, the Sephirah could be conceived like Chinese boxes, with each one having a whole tree in it, and each Sephirah of that tree having a further tree within it. And so on ad infinitum. So again, he's saying that the tree of life glyph that we see, it's a pattern of relationships. But within each one of those Sephirah is another whole tree, because it is still built upon the same pattern of relationships. And that process continues infinitely. There's no beginning or end to this. It's just a pattern. Gerald Sombright, peace, greetings. I am. Good evening. 17. And also what he said was once a good conception of that. So once you do take some time to contemplate that and try to figure out how such a thing could work, right? A tree within a tree. Once you could start to really concentrate on how that master key of the tree itself can operate within itself, once you start noticing those subtleties, you'll start noticing it in your daily life. You'll start noticing it in other places, and you'll start noticing further subtleties, right? This is what it's about. The more that you learn, the deeper your concentration and focus will be in the subject itself. That's how we learn anything. We start very broad and general, and when we master that, we get a little bit more subtle with it. Then we master that, and we get a little bit more subtle with it. I used to tell a story of how, I used to draw. When I was a child, I wanted to be a cartoonist, so I would draw all the time. And because I drew so much, I refined my skill, and it got better and more detailed. Then it got to the point where I was very confident drawing with pencils. No, excuse me, I used to draw with pencils first because I erased a lot. Then I got confident drawing with pen because I drew so much, I was so refined, and I could see what I was going to draw before I drew it, right? I was able to notice the subtlety of my own skill. I didn't need to erase anymore, so I drew exactly what I needed to draw. See, that was another level that came from being more refined, and that's what he's talking about here. When you're able to refine your work, whether it's your magical, spiritual work, whether it's the work that you do to get paid or whatever, when you refine it more and more, the level that you operate at is much higher. And that same thing can take place in your contemplation about the science here. 17. Too great refinement, of course, defeats its own purpose, but it can be a good exercise to take this process one stage at any rate and consider all the Sephirah in each Sephirah. This will give over 100 different categories if applied to the whole tree. And it is unlikely that there would be much use in going on to the second stage and producing over 1,000 of them, though the skilled numerologist might find interesting data, right? And you ever see those people who are like applying numerology to everything, right? I'm sure that some people are just reaching, but the ones who actually understand the subtleties of numerology, they will be finding recurring numeric patterns in everything, almost to the point where it can be maddening. I've seen things at that level before, and maybe you have too. So again, I might make jokes about numerology. That's not saying I don't believe it's valid, but I do know that if you're able to really zoom into these patterns, you will see them everywhere. And it'll start getting scary when you start telling people about it because they don't want to hear that. 18. As a start, one could try to conceive the action of the three pillars in each Sephirah. Now even the three pillars are in each Sephirah. That is, the active, passive, and equilibrated mode of function of the Sephirah. We know those as the gunas, Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva. One could then proceed to analyze each one according to its 4 levels. And from this the next stage of formulating the different Sephirah in a Sephirah is not such a formidable step. So in other words, what he's saying here is if you do want to get more refined, like say for instance, you do memorize the context of the 10 spheres, right? Say you do have a good understanding on how each one of the 10 Sephirah express with each other, within a relationship with each other. So you get a good grasp on that. Then what you can start to do is pick a Sephirah that you're working with and find the 10 Sephirah in here, but not to start with the 10 Sephirah, but to start with the 3 pillars within the Sephirah. That's a whole lot easier to grasp. So what he's saying here is you would visualize or contemplate one of the Sephirah, and then you would try to find the 3 gunas or the 3 pillars. You'd find the active aspect, the passive aspect, and the equilibrated aspect with each Sephirah. That's an easy way to start. One could then proceed to analyze each one according to its 4 levels, right? So we're talking about the 4 worlds, at the Absolute, at the Briatic level, at the Yetziratic level, then the Asiatic level. So really is breaking it down from, again, we're going very gross to more and more refined. So you think of the Sephirah, then you try to imagine it's active, passive, and equilibrated. Then you'd think of happening in the 4 stages, the 4 worlds. And from this, the next stage of the different Sephirah in a Sephirah is not such a formidable step. So that's what he's saying in verse 18. If you wanted to get good at that, that's how you would do it. That's how you would do it. 19. Biblical numerical symbolism derives very much from the Kabbalah, though one must remember that the early Kabbalists considered there to be 10 Sephirah only, as Doth was not then considered a Sephirah in its own right. Thus, the number 40, which appears in the context of the deluge, the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, and the time our Lord spent in the wilderness, has relevance to the 4 levels of each of the 10 Sephirah. 40. 40. The numbers 4, 7, 10, 12, and the result of multiplying those numbers as in 40, 100, 120, 144, 100,000, 144, 144,000, etc., occur most frequently in biblical literature, right? You keep seeing those recurring numbers, right? All this is really a specialist study, but it can be interesting to do a little speculative meditation, bearing in mind the 4 Kabbalistic worlds, the 4 holy living creatures and the elements, the 7 planes, and the 7 Sephirah of the magical circuit, the 10 Sephirah, and the 12 signs of the zodiac, and so on. That's how you break down that biblical numerology, because now you know about Kabbalah. When you see the number 4, it's probably best to think of the 4 elements, or the 4 creatures, or the 4 worlds. When you think of the number 7, it will probably be best to think of the 7 core Sephirah. You know, the ones that are not including the top 10, not including the upper triad. When you think of 10, think of the whole tree. When you think of 12, think of the zodiac. And he said even multiplying those, right? Because we see the 144,000. Interesting. 20. In relation to the reference to the magical circuit of 7 Sephirah, i.e. Doth, Chesed, Netzach, Yesod, Hod, Geburah, and Tiferet, it may be objected that Doth was not one of the original Sephirah. However, there was a well-known 7-fold division of the Tree of Life, which was used by the early Kabbalists, known as the 7 palaces. In this, the supernal triad is counted as 1, Yesod and Malkuth as 1, and the remaining Sephirah, excluding Doth, of course, 1 each. We have seen that Doth is really the point of contact with form of the supernal forces. And also that Yesod, wow, so that would explain why Doth lines up with Om. Om being the point of contact with consciousness and energy. And also in Tawashuti, when the practitioner goes past the point of Akasha, which is going to take place at the level of Geburah and Chesed, once you get past that level, you contemplate Om, which would be in the same place as Doth. Interesting. But yeah, I've got a diagram where I don't want to flip the pages. Maybe I'll just draw it. But anyways, you may have seen pictures of, he says that this is an older version of the tree, where you might have seen it drawn as a circle, where they have the upper 3 here, and they have Malkuth and Yesod here. So then that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So So that makes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh yeah, that doesn't belong there. There we go. So there are some versions, older versions of the tree look like this, and that's actually when the Bible or ancient texts talk about the 7 palaces. This is a lot of what they're talking about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. As a matter of fact, in Revelations, I think they talk about the beast or the dragon that has 10 crowns and 7 heads, one head that was but is not, and then one head that is to come but is not yet. I've also seen the cliff off drawn this way. Speaking of which, I guess I might as well flip to the page. That's what we've got all this stuff out here for anyways. Will he find it in time? Find out in the next exciting episode of... There it is. So you notice down there at the bottom? See that? You got the 7 spheres with Yesod and Malkuth in one, and then the upper triad in the top. But you also see that happening up here, the upper triad within one. Now, this is an older style of doing it, but you can still imagine the connection there, because it's pretty intricately known to those of us who do practice that Malkuth and Yesod are extremely closely related, almost to the point that they are seemingly one and the same. That same relationship is happening up here with the upper triad. They're so similar and actually to each other and so different from the rest that they could even be classified as their own thing. But just some interesting info there. (7-11) Peace, peace. Sunshine Chick, good evening. Okay, so in this, the supernal triad is counted as 1, Yesod and Malkuth as 1, and the remaining Sephirah, excluding Doth, of course, 1 each. We have seen that Doth is really the point of contact with form of the supernal forces, and also that Yesod and Malkuth, etheric and physical, are very intimately related. That's the 3rd time he said something right after I said it. Thus, for practical purposes, it is quite in order to use Doth as a Sephirah in this manner. And indeed, it is very useful to do so, provided one remembers to keep the middle way between inaccuracy and pedantry. 21. It cannot be stated too often that the tree of life is a living system, and life depends upon use and efficient function. And anyone who reads much in old books on the Kabbalah will find a considerable amount of dead wood. Whilst having the sense to discard this, it is also essential to put one's creative energy into developing new branches on the Kabbalistic tree. As long as the new growth is not of a parasitic and fungoid nature, which will have to be lopped off by subsequent generations. Kabbalah is a living science, which means that it is constantly unfolding. What we're doing now is still adding to this science. And it's expressed in each generation as the practitioners can relate to it, which means that some of the older texts might not be as relevant as you would think, because they would be outdated. Lily June, good evening, good evening. Hope you're having a nice day. 22. It can be useful to play about with the concepts of the tree as a kind of parlor game in order to gain flexibility in its use, Thus, one could try applying it to the governmental system of a country. Kether, the head of a state, Chokmah, the national ideals, Binah, the constitution, Doth, the religious hierarchy, Chesed, the legislature, Geburah, the judicature, Tifereth, the civil service, Netzach, the arts, Hod, the sciences, Yesod, the manufactories, and Malkuth, the land. Wow. I think that's definitely something that should also be considered. Like, the whole physical plane is only Malkuth. The rest of the 90% of this science is dealing with what is extraterrestrial. Like he said here, if we applied it to a country, only Malkuth itself would be talking about the land. Everything else is what's upon the land within the ideas of the people who inhabit it. 23. This kind of thing can lead to shallowness, for the deeper implications of the Sephirah are stages of spiritual being. But nevertheless, such an exercise is useful and valid, even as a representation of the tree and Malkuth applied on a sociological basis. It is when one has acquired the facility to throw around the Sephiroth like a juggler playing with colored balls, plus a good knowledge of their deeper aspects, that one really begins to appreciate the value of the system as a groundwork on which to base the whole of one's mentation. When you're able to really play with these concepts in such a way that it doesn't throw you off track, a lot like how a juggler can throw around the balls and keep track of them and do it quite elegantly. That level of skill and flexibility, plus a good knowledge of their deeper aspects, once you're able to grasp it at that level, he says that then you really begin to appreciate the value of this system as a groundwork on which to base the whole of one's mentation. You can base your whole thought process on this system. It certainly checks out. Chapter 18, Relationships of the Sephirah. From a cursory glance at the Yetziratic texts of the Sephirah, it can be seen that certain Sephiroth are particularly related to others, and indeed, in the last analysis, they are all interconnected, for the tree of life is a composite glyph of the relationships which go to make up a complete whole, whether that whole be a universe, or man, or even a Sephirah in itself. It is as a guide to certain of these relationships. Other subsidiary glyphs are applied to the tree of life, such as the lightning flash, the pillars of manifestation, the caduceus, and so on. 2. The lightning flash gives the order of manifestation of the Sephirah from Kether through Chokmah, Binah, Doth, Chesed, Geburah, Tifereth, Netzach, Hod, Yesod to Malkuth. And in this order of things, a Sephirah can be considered positive to the one which succeeds it, and negative to the one that precedes it. Thus, Hod, for example, depends forces which go to make up its forms on Netzach. Hod depends on Netzach, and is the source of formative influences for the treasure house of images in Yesod. The Yesod depends on Hod. Also, it would be seen that Kether is the supremely positive Sephiroth and Malkuth is the supremely negative, so that there is a strong polarity between these two Sephiroth. So, if you didn't catch that, which I'm sure you did, he's talking about right now the relationship of polarity between the Sephiroth in accordance with this lightning flash. So we know that the lightning flash of evolution starts here at Kether, and it just follow the white line. From Kether to Chesed, to Chokmah, to Binah, to Chesed, to Geburah, to Tifereth, to Netzach, Hod, Yesod, then finally Malkuth. That is the pattern that manifestation follows. So with that being the case, we can say that if we were dealing with Chokmah, Kether would be positive because it comes before it. Binah would be negative because it goes after it. So Chokmah is giving to Binah, but taking from Kether. So you see that? What's before it is positive, what's after it is negative. And then we can also see that Kether is the supreme positive because it gives to all. Malkuth is the supreme negative because it receives from all. So in a way, these two are ultimate polarities. Check. Caesar says, without positive and negative, you don't have a battery, I suppose. Absolutely. Without positive and negative flow through time, you don't have matter. Because matter in itself is inert. But with the influence of consciousness, it begins to flow in this way, like a battery. Okay, number 3. The pillars of manifestation, when applied to the tree, divide the Sephiroth into 3 categories. Aligned with the active pillar are Chokmah, Chesed, and Netzach. That's the right pillar. Aligned, well, yeah, let's see that. So here's what he's talking about here. He says, aligned with the active pillar are Chokmah, Chesed, and Netzach. Aligned with the passive pillar are Binah, Gibra, and Had. Aligned with the middle pillar of equilibrium are Kether, Doth, Tifereth, Yesod, and Malkuth. You can see that clearly here in this diagram. So on the active pillar, we've got Chokmah, Chesed, Netzach. On the passive pillar, we've got Binah, Gibra, and Had. And on the neutral pillar, on the, equilibrium, we've got Kether, Tifereth, Yesod, and Malkuth, right? So that's another series of relationships. First, we looked at the positive before, negative after, and neutral, which is the one we're dealing with. Now we're looking at the positive, the negative, and the neutral this way. So as you can see, we've got quite a few different relationships. I'm sure he's going to touch on this relationship next. In the same way that one Sephirah is positive or negative to its neighbor when the glyph of the lightning flash is applied, a similar relationship can be conceived up and down each pillar. Thus, Chesed, for example, is passive to Chokmah. So he's saying that we can see it up and down. That means that Chesed could be passive to Chokmah. In other words, this would be positive to this one. This would be negative to this one. Because the flow is going downwards. As far as I know, this is pretty self-explanatory, but if you're having trouble, let me know. Thus, Chesed, for example, is passive to Chokmah and positive to Netzach, and Gibra is passive to Binah and positive to Had, whilst on the central pillar, which could also be called the pillar of consciousness, the states of consciousness should each influence the one below it and be receptive to the one above. This clear run-through of power from Kether to Malkuth would indicate the spiritually enlightened man, but unfortunately there are blockages for most of us on the way down, which are symbolized by the abyss at the Doth level, the veil of Paraketh above Tifereth, and the gulf below Tifereth. So all those abysses, those blockages, this one here, and this one here, those blockages are those are the different veils of Maya. We can also see them on page 45 of Tawashuti that prevent us from realization of reality, right? In this diagram on page 45 of Tawashuti, we see Maya here, right? Blocking us from the upper triad. Even here is showing the system of relationships, right? We've got this Sattva Tattvas, Shiva Tattvas, Vidya Tattvas, Atma Tattvas, right? But here he's talking about Maya and the 5 Kanchukas, which are different blockages. that prevent us from knowledge. He's in Tatwa Shruti, she says that these are limitations. She calls them envelopes. Right? At this stage, Shiva or consciousness remains complete in itself, but is enveloped by the veiling power inherent in Chit Shakti, Maya. Here, Maya operates through 5 limiting aspects known as Kanchukas. Kanchuka literally means sheath or envelope, and together they act like the shell which obscures the kernel. Each Kanchuka limits the cosmic power of Shiva Shakti in one aspect. Shell. Shell. Does anyone know a Kabbalistic term for the shells? Anybody? Has anybody heard of any shells in reference to Kabbalah? But yeah, we've got Kala, which limits the force of action, right? And it limits the power to do all. It limits omnipotence. We've got Avidya, which limits the force of knowledge, so it limits our omniscience. We've got Raga, which limits the force of, of will. It limits the force of true will, and it creates desire and attachment, and it gives rise to discontent. We've got Kala, which limits perpetual existence by creating the notion of time, right? So this limitation makes us think that there's a thing called time related to the changes in life, namely birth, growth, ripening, waning, and perishing. Rebirth. Niyati, that which limits free will. Purushartha, by creating the notion of fate, destiny, right? If you watch my last video, we talked about that. Pure attachment to the elements is what gets you there, thus binding the individual to the endless cycle of birth and death. Bingo. Thus, in this stage, we see the omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence of the Shiva Shakti unity veiled by the power of Maya to create the notion of duality. See, what you actually are is divine mind. You are, and you always will be. You cannot be anything less. But you are veiled with various veils. And those various veils keep your awareness centered on something that is very temporary and very illusory, right? Illusory force. Get this, because you're never gonna get me. Yes. MC Maestro says Cliff-off. Gerald Sombright says the shells of the tree of life, the clip-off. Exactly. So let's continue. So we got the abyss at the Doth level, the veil of Paraketh, which is above Tifereth, and the gulf below Tifereth. I forgot the name of that veil. But anyways, to say nothing of the noxious influences arising from the cliffotic pit below Malkuth. I keep referencing Malkuth as, I keep referencing Cliff-off as something that isn't very useful. And I keep referencing the abyss as like the cosmic porta potty. And I do get people who are very passionate about their study in the Cliff-off and like, well, why do you say that about the Cliff-off? You know, I've done such and such work with the Cliff-off and it's good and da-da-da-da-da. But, I mean, if you just look at this thing, a lot of people sell the Cliff-off as this alternative and edgy path, but really they're just teaching regular Kabbalah. They're just making it spicy. It's spicy Kabbalah. The Cliff-off is not something cool and edgy to use. It's literally discarded shells. You know, when you eat a peanut, when you crack that peanut open, you know, if you get it fresh, you got to crack that shell off and throw it away. You can't chew on the shell. Even if you get boiled peanuts, the shell might have some flavor, but you don't swallow the freaking shell. You throw it away because it isn't useful. You eat what's inside. Right? I got this. Another word for the Cliff-off is like similar to the word that we use for a rind or a husk. You know, I got a watermelon in there and I'm about to slice it open and I'm going to eat what is sweet. But that shell's going in the trash. I'm going to give thanks for it because without it, I wouldn't have that sweet stuff in the middle. But the shell, the rind, the husk, it's not edgy and cool. Like, it's not useful to this reality. Its purpose is served in the past. That's what the Qliphoth is about. But I'm gonna read that last line again. So yeah, he talks about the different veils, and he says, to say nothing of the noxious influences arising from the Qliphotic pit below Malkuth. 4. The relationship between the Sephiroth of the central pillar is also stressed in that each one is assigned to the element of air, with the exception of Malkuth, which is earth. So if we're looking at those three pillars, the middle pillar completely is assigned to air. Malkuth is assigned to earth. He says air is a symbol for consciousness, and earth is the final dense concretion, which is implied by Malkuth. So if Malkuth is the final dense concretion, how would you even relate the Qliphoth? If Malkuth is the final, then what does that say about the Qliphoth? Poo-poo. The Sephiroth of the side pillars are assigned to the elements of fire and water, according to their activity or passivity. Thus, Chokmah is assigned to fire and Binah to water. It is interesting to note that the assignation of fire and water does not apply all the way down each pillar of activity or passivity. The fire Sephiroth are Chokmah, Gibra, and Netzach. This introduces the relationship and positivity and negativity between the diagonally opposite Sephiroth. Thus, the organizing powers of Chesed are reflected from the ideas of form in Binah, and the influence of the lower forms of Had, and the fiery motivating quality of Gibra is reflected in the primal force of Chokmah and influences the vitality of the diverse forces of Netzach. Okay, really bringing some concepts in this particular chapter. Testing, 1, 2. So he's talking here about these specific type of relationships and how, let's see. In one way, we could say this is Gibra being on, even though it's on the passive side. Actually, I should probably do that in blue. Passive, which if it had to relate to anything, it would relate to water. And on the other side would be the active pillar, which would relate to fire. The middle would relate to air, and the Malkuth itself would relate to earth. So, what he said here on that last line was the fiery motivating quality of Gibra is reflected from the primal force of Chokmah. Reflected. And it influences the vitality of the diverse forces in Netzach. Right? That's one relationship. And another relationship, we've got the organizing forces of Chesed, the organizing powers of Chesed, which are reflected from Binah, reflected from the seed of form in Binah. But that influences the ideas, or I should say the influencing of the lower forms in Had. But anyways, this whole concept of the elements dealing with those pillars should not be anything foreign. because we actually have covered that extensively, at least twice on my YouTube channel over the past few years. And we'll see that here where Ophel really introduced us to the Tatwas, his book, The Art and Practice of Kabbalah Magic. And the way that he describes the Tree of Life is in this way. He describes it in the way of these Sephirah being related to the elements. And if you know the Tatwas, then you'll see here that he's, get a color picture. He's got an assigning of not only the pillars with the elements, but also the four worlds, right? See here, Malkuth, earth. We know that the yellow square is Prithvi, that's the earth element. The moon shape is the water element. We're dealing with the world of Yetzirah. The triangle is Agni or Tejas, the fire element, and the circle is Vayu, the air element. So if you've got a deeper understanding now of the Tatwas and the elements and Kabbalah, you can actually go back to this book and see that what he was talking about was correct. See, I didn't really get it or agree with Ophel at the time, but after reading it again with my knowledge of the Tatwas, it makes sense why he would assign them this way. Not only does he assign the Sephiroth with the elements, but he also relates the three pillars with time, being the middle pillar as the present, the active pillar as the past, and the passive pillar as the future. But hopefully you have already gone through this book and have already highlighted some passages in it. So now you can go back and check out what he was talking about in comparison to what you know now. Ophel, man, he was more advanced than he made it seem, that's for sure. Some of y'all might remember. Five, most of these relationships are covered by the interlinking paths of the tree. And the correct understanding of these paths depends much on an understanding of the Sephirah they join, just as a full understanding of a Sephirah depends much on an understanding of the paths leading to and from it, and the Sephirah at the further end of these paths. The ideas of the polarity of the pillars is also implicit in the division of the tree into triads. Okay, now we're talking about the triads. The unity of Kether is divided in the next lower plane into the opposites of Chokmah and Binah, which are resumed into unity on the next lower plane, Doth. So what does he say there? The unity of Kether is divided into the next lower plane into the opposites of Chokmah and Binah. There was unity, but as we go down in density, that unity is divided. It's pulled apart into masculine and feminine. It is no longer unity. It's now separated. But if you descend just a little bit more, we find that that separation of polarity is unified again in Doth. And if you notice, that keeps happening. From unity to duality, from unity to duality, from unity to duality, from unity to manifestation. There's a pattern. There's a pattern there. Where there's a pattern, there's the potential for intelligence. Where there's potential for intelligence, there's the potential for liberation. So pay attention. Still descending on planes, the unity of Doth divides into the polar opposites of Chesed and Gibarah, resumed again into unity with Tifereth, to divide again into the lower pole opposites of Netzach and Hod, finally to assume unity again in Yesod and Malkuth. In this lies much teaching on the degradation or sublimation of force to and from each of the 7 planes. The term degradation is not used pejoratively, of course, but in a technical sense of stepping down. The Caduceus shows this principle in another manner. At the head is a symbol of fertility, the pine cone in Kether, and at the bottom, the lower symbol of fertility, the sign of Scorpio, the scorpion. The special spiritual nature of Chokmah and Bina is shown by the outspread wings which cover them, and the lower Sephirah are shown to be in polarity by the intertwined snakes. The intertwined snakes, whose tails join in Malkuth and whose heads meet in Doth, whilst they also overlap at Yesod and Tifereth. The coils of the dark snake pass through the diagonal opposites of Chesed and Hod, and the coils of the bright snake through Gibarah and Netzach. The bright and dark colors of the snake indicate force and form, potencies respectively, which is confirmed by the nature of the side Sephirah which each passes through. 8. There are also threefold, fourfold, and sevenfold Kabbalistic groupings of the Sephirah on the tree, which have been previously mentioned. The threefold grouping consists of the vast countenance, the lesser countenance, and the bride. The vast countenance, Eric Anpin, or Macroprosopus, consists of Kether essentially, but also includes Chokmah and Bina as the supernal father and supernal mother aspects of the vast countenance. The lesser countenance, Zawar Anpin, or the Microprosopus, is centered in Tifereth, but includes the Sephirah which encircle it. The bride of Macroprosopus is the remaining Sephirah, Malkuth. Applied to the microcosm, which is man, this division gives the alignment of the Sephirah with spirit, the psyche, and the physical body and environment. In this system, Zawar Anpin is sometimes called the king, and Malkuth therefore the queen. Malkuth may also be called the terrestrial Eve, or the lesser mother, to distinguish it from the supernal mother, Bina. The fourfold groupings is the system of the four worlds, Atziluth, Bria, Yetzirah, and Asaya. These are usually translated as the archetypal world, the creative world, the formative world, and the material world, respectively. Atziluth consists of Kether, Bria of Chokmah and Bina, Yetzirah, the central group of the Sephirah, and Asaya, Malkuth. This is basically similar to the threefold division, except that a differentiation is made within the spiritual realms of Kether, Chokmah, and Bina. The sevenfold system is called the seven palaces, and we already talked about that. Yesod and Malkuth, and include the three supernals in one palace, Yesod and Malkuth also together in one, and assigns one palace to each of the other Sephirah, with the exception of Doth, which is not considered as a Sephirah in this classification. 12. We have already mentioned dividing the tree into triads by considering the alternate unity and division into polar opposites on alternate planes. However, there are three main Kabbalistic triads consisting of one upward pointing triangle, Kether, Chokmah, and Bina, and two downward pointing ones, Chesed, Gibarah, Tifereth, and Netzach, Hod, Yesod. These were originally translated by Mathers as the intellectual world, the moral world, and the material world, with the exception of the moral world. And by the way, you have definitely seen that diagram in the back of Mystical Kabbalah, right? That upper triad, the central triad, and the lower triad. These terms can be very misleading. Mathers' intellectual world could better be called the archetypal, supernal, or spiritual world, and the material world is unsatisfactory as the title for the material world is essentially Malkuth. Dion Fortune has suggested calling the lowest triad the astral world. Though this is by no means an ideal title, one could suggest calling it the form or the psychological world, but the important factor is not really the name, but what one understands by the triad. And there does not seem to be any one word which covers all of the implications of these three Sephirah. Let's see if I can find this particular diagram in this other book. We'll use that one just in case we can't find it. Page 45. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jacks. There's the process of that lightning bolt coming down the 10 spheres in order. Remember what he said? The preceding one is positive, and the one that's coming after it is negative. It only makes sense. And he also talked about the 3 pillars. He also mentioned the 3 triangles. So all this is rudimentary Kabbalah. Rudimentary Kabbalah. This isn't even the advanced stuff yet. But it's very, very good to get a firm grasp on this stuff without having to look at a picture. The more that you can understand it just based on recall, like you said earlier in this chapter, the more refined your understanding is going to be, which means you'll start to see the deeper nuances of this thing. Now, where were we? Let's continue. Another method of conjoining the Sephirah is to describe the Star of David or interlaced triangles about Tifereth. Thus, Chesed, Gibra, and Yesod form one triangle, and Doth, Netzach, and Hod form the other. The principle of the interlaced triangles is an important one in spiritual progress. The soul or higher self or individuality is symbolized by a downward pointing triangle, which projects into incarnation its lower self or personality, symbolized by the upward pointing triangle. In the unevolved man, there is no contact between lower and higher consciousness, and so the triangles are drawn separately, one above the other. During the process of uniting higher and lower consciousness, however, the process is symbolized by the 2 triangles gradually overlapping until eventually, in the fully illuminated man, they form the Star of David. This signifies the lower consciousness striving to reach up to the levels of Doth awareness, and the higher consciousness striving to make itself effective and functional in the lower worlds. Good stuff. That book didn't have the diagram I was looking for, but you can see this right here and just notice that this is actually Tifereth. And he's talking about the lower consciousness reaching upwards toward Doth and the higher consciousness reaching downwards toward Malkuth. That's the enlightened man, the awakened man. The unawakened man, you'll see this triangle on top. Excuse me, you'll see this triangle on the bottom, so it's like a figure 8. I know there's a diagram in here of that. But that's essentially how the Star of David relates to the Tree of Life. We're looking at 2 modes of operation, one reaching up toward Doth and one reaching down toward Malkuth. We're also looking at the relationship between Christ and Lucifer, one coming down from heaven to earth and one going from earth up to heaven. That's why Christ and Lucifer are the same entity, just on different polarities. One represents the journey of ascension from these lower 2 up to Doth, and one represents the descending aspect. Now notice this lower triangle has to end in Yesod. This is the place of contact that we get with the higher self. The etheric plane is the point of contact that we have with God, with divinity. And the etheric plane is accessed through things like creative imagination. If spirit were to speak to us, it does so through the etheric plane, and we then translate that into our everyday language. So you're not going to see a demon pop up from around the corner and tell you something. It's going to happen in the etheric plane. If you don't have vision on the etheric plane, you might perceive it a different way. You might hear or feel or smell or taste in your mind's eye, so to speak. And likewise, the reaching up process, notice how it begins in Hod and Netzach. The reaching up process happens beyond the etheric plane. So it isn't just about imagining stuff and playing pretend. That imagining has to be fueled and filled by something that is before it, something that is beyond it. Whether it's a deep study or a deep devotion, those two are what leads up to this aspect of Doth. Make sense? No. O Supreme Redeemed, peace and greetings. "14. It would also be possible, of course, to describe a six-rayed star centered around Doth, or to construct five-pointed stars depending from Kether or Doth. Furthermore, one can attempt to fit all manner of symbols graphically to the tree, such as the planetary signs, for example. This practice may give some interesting hints or may prove in many cases abortive, but it makes quite an interesting diversion. And whilst the parlor game attitude is not a good one to maintain in occultism, such intellectual diversions do make for familiarity and flexibility in using the aspects of the tree, and this is all very much to the good." Very good. Good stuff. You can't go wrong. You can't lose with the stuff I use. I tell you that. You can't lose with the stuff I use. I couldn't really find the diagrams I wanted, but he did just mention this one here, if you were to draw the six-rayed star around Doth. And again, you'll see that reaching upward and that reaching downward. Then you got stuff like this. This is a representation of the secret paths. Did you know that there were secret paths? It'd probably be best for us to learn about the original paths first before we start talking about secret paths. Yeah, Micah, happy birthday, bro. Happy birthday. I hope you enjoy yourself. Hope you enjoy yourself. All right, so that was a little bit of information on the patterns that are present in the tree. I wonder if we can do one more chapter. This next chapter is 10 pages. 10 pages. I mean, we could do 10 pages. You want to do one more chapter or go ahead and call it a night? Wow, we're really almost done. Oh my God. I mean, shit, we probably could finish this whole thing tonight. Because there's only 30 pages left. There's only 30 pages left. Why not? We'll do one more chapter. Chapter XIX, also known as 19. So this is going to talk about the Esoteric Grades. For those of you who may not know, within this particular system, the ranking is set up by, or symbolized by the 10 spheres. So the person with the highest rank would be equivalent to Epistemists, and the person with the lowest rank would be equivalent to Malkuth level. So when you enter this system, when you're serious about it, when you go up the ranks, it's related to each of the Sephirah. So we can read about that, the Esoteric Grades. I wonder what we'll find. Moby, peace, peace. Good to see you. Matthew Watson, peace, peace. IDKDKF, peace, peace. Gerald Sombright Jr. says, finishing the whole thing doesn't sound too bad. It doesn't actually. What I might do is just this chapter now and do the rest of the chapters in the morning. And then we can jump right into the second book, which is definitely about some stuff that I am not super knowledgeable on, but I am happy to learn something new. All right, so let's go with this chapter, the Esoteric Grades. The subject of esoteric grades has probably caused more foolishness and misunderstanding than any other branch of esoteric learning. Foolishness. Don't come here with all that foolishness. Don't come here with all that foolishness. Number 2, in any esoteric group which uses the graded system, it must be remembered that all the grades are largely arbitrary, and the lower stages at any rate. Thus, an occult fraternity may have a hierarchical system of grades adequately functioning, but another fraternity, perhaps working at a higher or deeper level, would have similar grades, but they would all be correspondingly higher in function, if not in name, than those of the first fraternity. Consequently, if a fraternity suddenly breaks new ground and winds up successfully the previous phase of its group development, it is often necessary for the whole group to be dropped down to the lowest grade, and then, having established foundations on the new higher level, to commence building the structure of a new graded hierarchy. Interesting. I know that in some groups, if you leave one and go to the other, you have to start from the beginning. Because even if you know a bunch of stuff, you still got to go through that other way, because each group got to their ends differently. No one says that it's going to translate evenly. 3. From these considerations, it will be seen that a neophyte in one fraternity might well be much more spiritually advanced than a neophyte in another. Also, in any genuine group, it is necessary for all newcomers to start from the lowest grade and work their way up, eventually finding their own level. In this way, a very advanced person may be in the lower grades for some time, so a distinction must be made also between the inner grade, which is the true capability of that person, and the outer grade, which often depends mainly on the date on which they entered a fraternity. It usually taking at least a year to get through each of the lower grades. So in other words, yes, there is a grading system. But one thing that is to be remembered is that there is an inner grade as well as an outer grade. The outer grade relates to your time in the group and your achievements in the group, and also how you reveal your understanding to the authority of that group. Just like how you may go to college and already be like super educated on a certain subject through self-study, but you still have to start at the freshman level, right? You might know the information at a sophomore level, but you still have to go through the process. Number 4. With regard to the inner grade, there will also be differences of grade within the psychological aspects of one person. Thus, he might be able to function at a high spiritual level in some directions and be quite unregenerate in others. An esoteric student, like a chain, is as strong as his weakest link, and his advancement should be according to how he masters his weaknesses rather than how great he can be in his strengths. Occasionally, though it may benefit a person to be put up to a higher grade, even though his weaknesses do not justify it, because the stimulus of the higher grade may help him to overcome those weaknesses. Likewise, a person who has a very inadequate personality may, for his own protection, be taken into a higher grade where the emphasis is on the higher consciousness rather than the lower. If he were left in a low grade, which brought forces to bear mainly upon the lower levels, the personality might suffer injury. Such a case as this would be rare, and only applied where a high-grade soul and a low-grade personality for an incarnation for karmic reasons. Also, only a well-established fraternity would dare to advance unfit people in this way, and such people would not be put in the highest grade where pioneering work was going on, for the sake of themselves and the sake of the fraternity. And if you didn't know, that's what happens in the high grades. Pioneering work. Not just people sitting around talking about how great they are. Usually, people who are doing this pioneering work in the higher grades don't have time to be bragging to other people about how awesome they are, because we're doing things that no one else has done yet. All right? Number 5. This is an extreme case, but it applies in lesser ways to most people. For example, except in very rare individuals, there are certain aspects of the personality which cannot be perfected, however long they may be kept in the lower grades. And so people are usually advanced to higher grades in spite of certain more or less permanent inadequacies they may have. These inadequacies will always constitute a weakness to the group, of course, but in physical existence at the present time, perfection is impossible. If anyone were perfect, he would not need to incarnate. These weaknesses may affect the group in certain ways. In practical work, they can be minimized by intelligent organization of the head of the fraternity, but the results which cannot be avoided entirely are the reactions of the members of lesser grade, who, when they first enter a fraternity, expect to see absolute perfection manifested by the senior members and are consequently disillusioned. Though this may be no bad thing, for it is an appreciation of realities that is required of any occult aspirant. The other way in which weakness in senior members may damage the group is that it can serve as a channel for evil forces which always act to disrupt a group. Usually these forces will manifest through a member whose inadequacy is that he is an individualist and a perfectionist, and who loses no opportunity to ferret out and criticize the faults of others. Evil generally poses as the good. 7. What is really needed in an esoteric group is group-mindedness and a willingness to turn a blind eye to the defects of others and look after the state of one's own soul. There is no defense of laxity in esoteric matters, but is an assessment of factors as they are in reality. Individual members of an esoteric group should not indulge in criticism in thought, emotion, or word, for the responsibility for the assessment of the members of the group rests with the head of the group alone. If the head of the group is gravely deficient in any way, then there is little the group can do about it. Criticism will not help matters at all, but merely serve to speed the breakup of the group caused by the inadequacy of the head. 8. Finally, there is the cyclic factor to take into consideration. A person may be able to function at a high spiritual level for a time and then will drop back down to a low level. Ever experienced that? This is quite a normal occurrence, in the earlier stages especially, and it could be said that the person is of a high grade at his peak points and of a low grade at his low points. Generally speaking, the tendency is an upward one, however. And as time goes on, the peaks and troughs get progressively higher, so that what was a peak of achievement for a person may, several years later, be a normal level of functioning, or even a comparatively low level, experienced only when he is spiritually off form. In other words, imagine what a bad day for Michael Jordan might be like in his prime, right? Still going to be better than your best. Taking into account this cyclic or spiral factor, it can be seen that a high-grade person experiencing a low point may well act on a lower level than a low-grade person experiencing a peak period. An observer, watching the two together in an environment, would not be able to assess their relative merits properly, unless he could observe them over a fairly long period of time, even assuming his own spiritual standing was high enough not to distort his powers of observation and assessment.
9. It will thus be seen that the whole conception of grade is a complicated one, but there are definite grades which are aligned with the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. For practical purposes, these grades may often be ideal rather than real, but they have to be real eventually for any real spiritual progress to be made. By means of the grades assigned to the Sephiroth, one could judge the standing of any group, for its real standing is based on reality. A head of a group might call himself an epistemic, but if he had not got control of the elements within himself, then he would, in reality, not even be an adeptus minor, whatever he called himself, and he would not be able to initiate anyone to a higher level than he was himself. Thus, the quality of a group depends upon the quality of its leader. 10. Incidentally, a functioning adeptus minor would hardly have the lack of reality to call himself an epistemic. As a general rule, the higher a professed occultist claims to be, the lower he usually is in reality. There's nothing to stop anyone from claiming to be an epistemic or magus or what have you, and initiating people through as many grades as they like to pay money for, but there will have been no initiation in reality. No genuine adept, and only an adept can initiate, will demand money, simply because initiation cannot be bought. It has to be striven for. As a proviso, it should be said that most esoteric schools charge fees for their initial lessons or correspondence courses in preparation for initiation, simply to recover their expenses. After initiation and consequently membership of a group, all that is asked for is voluntary donations, as with any church, and lack of money is never allowed to be a bar to initiation. 11. The esoteric grades according to the Kabbalistic system are as follows: Malkuth, Zealoter; Yesod, Theoricus; Hod, Practicus; Netzach, Philosophus; Tifereth, Adeptus Minor; Gibera, Adeptus Major; Chesed, Adeptus Exemptus; Bina, Magister Templi; Chokmah, Magus; Kether, Epistemic. The term neophyte is used to denote anyone who has just entered a higher grade, whatever that grade may be. 12. This allocation of Sephiroth to grades is misleading to some extent, for the real progress is along the paths. 13. Malkuth represents in that it is the sphere of physical life. The seeker, who has realized that there is perhaps much of significance behind the world of physical appearances, and who has a sense of looking for a quest to follow out. This could be likened to a faint shadowing forth of the spiritual experience of Malkuth, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. And in his search for an esoteric group to study with, he will need every ounce of discrimination, the virtue of Malkuth, that he can muster. 14. On contacting a group and pursuing a definite scheme of esoteric training, he can be said to be treading the 32nd and 25th paths of the Tree of Life, from Malkuth through Yesod to the outer aspects of Tifereth. During this process, which is essentially one of training the personality, his task is to tread the middle way through the conflicting pulls of the forces of Netzach and Hod. To trod the middle way through the conflicting pulls of the forces of Netzach and Hod. To tread the middle way amidst the conflicting pulls of Netzach and Hod. 15. In Malkuth, the tests are mainly those of good character, as should be expected of anyone in the world, though good character is particularly essential as a basis on which to build the conscious use of the higher powers of the soul. Also, of course, no one ever leaves the lowest grade. One builds the higher grades onto it. a lot like computer programming. However spiritually advanced a person may be, he still needs the good character and mundane efficiency and common sense of Malkuth. Also, it will be seen that the full initiation of Malkuth, the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, which is a complete grasp of the way of one's destiny, is not likely to be attained until a high degree of development is reached. 16. At the phase of development corresponding to Yesod, the subconscious mind should be opened up. And so, at this stage, ideally speaking, a complete course of psychological analysis should be undergone. For to proceed to higher occult knowledge while suffering from any concealed pathology or neurosis is asking for trouble. Don't skip it. This process is not necessarily what is known as psychoanalysis, but the gaining of a deeper knowledge of oneself through techniques of spiritual psychology. Sounds a lot like what we've been talking about in this book, eh? You know, if you've been paying attention and practicing. "17. From Yesod, the soul undergoes a subjective experience of great isolation, and there may be a sharp crisis corresponding to the point where the soul passes, symbolically, across the lateral 27th path. So in case you're not aware, the 27th path is the tower, right? And that's what happens between Hod and Yesod. That's the tower. And I do mention that right at the beginning of my course. Basically, as you begin the course and taking these exercises seriously, there will start to be events that might seem like a sudden burst of bad luck, but that's not actually what's happening. That's you crossing this 27th path of the tower. And once you get past that point without being pulled left or right, then you can start to see through the smoke. So, I'll read that again, 17. From Yesod, the soul undergoes a subjective experience of great isolation, and there may be a sharp crisis corresponding to the point where the soul passes symbolically across the lateral 27th path. See, this is why it's good to understand the tree and the paths, because you can start to see where you find your experience in any given day. This crisis having been successfully passed, the mystical contacts begin to open up, so that the initiate is able to function in vertical polarity with the inner forces as well as in horizontal polarity with the forces of his acquaintances, friends, and relations in the outer world. Should the soul succumb to the crisis point, he usually leaves the group, returning quite rapidly to the psychological condition he was in before he joined. And I'm sure that there was a small number of people who I still said that the complications will happen, but they got bogged down by the complications and didn't make it through. And then there are others, which I know at least one who's in this chat, who did manage to overcome all those obstacles and came out so much better. Congratulations to you, my friend. But at the end of the day, you can't force anybody to do anything. Either you got it in you or you do not. That's for you to decide. I'm just here to provide information. 18. During this whole process from Malkuth to below Tifereth, the training is done largely on a group basis, and any defects that have been left untouched are balanced up after or in Tifereth when the training is more individual. Ideally, the initiate who has reached this stage should be of sound mind and healthy body, with no repressed unconscious complexes, and with a functioning area of mystical consciousness. He should be neither dominated by the environment of Malkuth, the instincts and passions of Yesod, the concrete mind of Hod, or the over-emotionalism of the unbalanced Netzach. This, of course, is a counsel of perfection and rarely manifest in practice, though it is the goal which must be ardently striven for. According to how its members measure up to this ideal state, the archetypal grades of the Sephirah, so is the power and effectiveness of the fraternity. The power of the fraternity is based on how closely each individual lines up with the rank that they're assigned. Nice. So he's saying, ideally, one who reaches the stage of Tifereth, ideally, should be of sound mind and healthy body. They should not have any repressed unconscious complexes. They should have a functioning area of mystical consciousness. They should not be dominated by the environment of Malkuth. They shouldn't be dominated by the instincts and the passions of Yesod. They shouldn't be dominated by the concrete mind. Oh, it has to be this way. They shouldn't be dominated by the over-emotionalism of unbalanced Netzach. And of course, he's saying that's describing a perfect state, but at the same time, it should be striven for as often and as frequently and as ardently as possible. And the closer that the members line up to this description, that's a display of the potency of the group itself. 19. Together with this inner process, of course, goes the training in elementary magical technique according to the system used by the particular group. It is proficiency in this which is often confused with esoteric grades in published works. 20. The opening up of the mystical consciousness has its correspondence with the piercing of the veil of Kesheth. That's what it's called. So yeah, the lower veil is called the veil of Kesheth. And that's the one between Yesod and Tifereth. Gotcha. This veil is symbolized in rainbow colors and indicates the light of Tifereth being refracted through the astral or emotional sphere. On the Yesod side, it is a bow of promise, which yet veils the direct vision of the mystical consciousness of Tifereth, which is seen in direct vision as soon as the veil is passed. 21. The next step is an important one and is called the crossing of the gulf, and it is of the nature of an unreserved dedication. It is said that it takes 3 incarnations of steady effort to attain this point. It is really a leap of faith, for it means that the values of the soul have to be changed from those of the outer world of expediency to those of the inner world of principle. After this step has been taken, the initiate has dedicated his life to the service of the hierarchy, and he becomes the accepted disciple of the inner plane adept. He becomes an accepted disciple of an inner plane adept. There is an inner plane adept that you become an accepted disciple of. Once you decide to dedicate your life to the service of the hierarchy. This involves, first, dedication by the initiate. Secondly, a period of probation in which his dedication is tested. And thirdly, possible acceptance by the inner plane adept concerned. It should be stressed that the tests are not artificial ones, but come about quite naturally in the circumstances of life of the initiate. Yeah, these tests aren't given by some grandmaster wizard. Like, it literally just comes out. It just comes out when it's time. And if you fail the test, you'll know because, you're going to get either too emotional about it or you're going to do something that didn't come from your highest impulse. And maybe you'll get another chance. That's why it's so important to be aware at all times of your own behavior. It should be stressed that the tests are not artificial ones, but come about quite naturally in the circumstances of life of the initiate. Also, the dedication at this stage is a lesser one, for it is recognized that certain very important duties, such as the welfare of children, for example, will have precedence over the work of the mysteries, should the two happen to conflict. MC Maestro says, most Jedi trials seen are not formal and often arise out of happenstance. Precisely. Always ready. Always ready. 22. The gulf having been leaped, and it really implies the power to act as an individual without reliance on others, Rather than eschewing of the things of this world, the process of Tiferet are undergone. The child, the king, the sacrificed God. These processes are the growth and development of spiritual awareness and action until eventually the personality is sacrificed. That's the sacrifice. That's the great sacrifice. That one day this ego, this personality that you've become so attached to, has to be released. And I'm talking about while you're alive, not after you die. And the initiate works entirely according to spiritual principle, insofar as his karma allows him. Another way of looking at this would be to say that the initiate has a clear channel of communication between his higher self and lower self, individuality and the personality, soul and the lower vehicles, Krishna and Arjuna, evolutionary personality and incarnationary personality, according to the terminology preferred. However you want to call it, however you want to spit it. This sacrifice of the self is actually the union that we've been striving for, the union between higher self and lower self, between the soul and the body and the mind. Because it's the same thing as a drop of water entering an ocean. The individuality is it's just gone. It's absorbed. You know what I'm saying? It's just union. And at the same time that happens, the ego, the personality, the self that you used to know loses its substance. The soul then proceeds, symbolically speaking, up the 22nd path of karmic adjustment to Gibara. And if you don't know, the 22nd path of karmic adjustment is known as justice. So he just showed you that you're going from 32nd path to the tip to the Yesod level. Then you're going up and you have to cross the tower, which is usually going to be a trial and test and a tribulation. It's going to test your dedication to see if you're really about it, because most people are not about it. But if you do cross that test, then you go across this next channel of justice, which is really calibrating and recalibrating what is useful and what is appropriate. By the way, this is everything that we've been learning about in this particular book. None of this stuff is just reading it because it's cute and fun. This is the path. This is the way. Or your money back guaranteed. So yeah, the soul then proceeds, symbolically speaking, up the 22nd path of karmic adjustment to Gibara. This is a process of facing and abreacting most of the karma accrued within, roughly, the period of historical time. From Gibara, the lateral path to Chesed is trodden, which involves the complete facing of karma throughout the whole evolutionary past of the soul, so that when the initiate is firmly established in Chesed, he is karma-free. He has accepted responsibility for all his actions and is in a position to carry out his work of destiny in complete freedom from the results of past errors. You might have noticed on my diagram, I drew these different levels of memory that go from individual to collective. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Once you begin to neutralize the individual influence of your subconscious memories of your childhood, once you begin to neutralize those, now you naturally start dealing with what else is there, which is getting more and more global, more hereditary, more racial. Once you deal with yourself, now you start harmonizing the patterns that exist within your genetics, within your cultural grouping, within the whole human race, and then it continues to extend. But right now we're talking about, he says, facing the karma throughout the whole evolutionary past of the soul, right? So by the time that you actually do get to the chesed level, you're karma free because you dealt with all that. You already dealt with all that on the previous level. And the benefit of this is that you're now suited to carry out your work in complete freedom from the results of past errors, the freedom from any past karma. This is the grade of exempt adept, and such a one would have no need to reincarnate, and being exempt from his own karma would be in a position to take on and work out aspects of group karma, as was exemplified by our Lord. Right? You got to be qualified to take on group karma. It's not just about making a YouTube channel saying you're here to heal generational curses for $100 a pop. That don't even sound right. You got to have the qualifications to do that. And namely, the qualifications include that you've done it on yourself down to your hereditary level. Yes, it's possible. Yes, it's possible. But this information is only for a few people because, most of us are still at that Malkuth level. But just in case there are some of you guys who are at this point, let's keep reading, because you never know what could happen next week, next month, next year, right? You guys keep studying this information, and you're certainly going to soar past whatever you thought you would be doing. I'll read that again because it was a cool line. This is the grade of exempt adept, and such a one would have no need to reincarnate, and being exempt from his own karma would be in a position to take on and work out aspects of group karma, as was exemplified by our Lord, sweet Jesus. Generally speaking, this task is better done on the inner planes at the present time, conditions of physical existence being too degenerate for such a being to work to full efficiency, and high-grade workers on the inner planes being so few. So again, you're not going to see these type of practitioners talking about this work on YouTube, because there's literally no point in doing that. There's no point in doing that. And most of it is going to be done on the inner plane, so you're not even going to see it. You might feel it. You might start feeling like, you know what? Life's been getting better for me lately. You know what? My luck is starting to improve. You know what? I'm feeling better about myself. Group karma. That means that the group feels the effects of the work being done. Let's continue. And by the way, high-grade workers on the inner planes being so few. Gratitude. Much gratitude. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. Gratitude. 24. From Chesed lies the secret path to Doth, which is symbolized by the term the empty room. This implies the facing of absolute reality without the veils of symbols or indeed form of any nature. It starts getting real complex up here. Because it's like, not only do you take such a long time training yourself to get rid of negative thought, but then eventually, and this is like further down the line, eventually you just have to start getting rid of positive thought. Because the ego has this tendency of attaching abstract meaning to just anything, right? We identify with something, it's just instinctual, it's habit-based, it's not free will. We just identify with stuff. When we were a kid, we'd see these nice cars driving by, and we'd be like, oh, that's my car. I'm going to be driving that when I'm grown up. We're identifying with it, and we're attaching to it. And that has a result of building our personality in a certain direction, which is getting further and further away from truth. You have to build something. That means it wasn't naturally there. A lot of us go through the process of these idle thoughts when, like, say you make a mistake or this memory comes up where you did something stupid. You're like, oh, why the fuck did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. They probably think I'm an idiot. Those thoughts have no place in your head. Those thoughts must be neutralized to where they don't come up anymore. And after you become established in that, the next piece of work is getting rid of adding abstract story, right? You see 11:11 on the clock. Oh, that means I'm in alignment and everything is good, While there's nothing wrong with that type of thinking, it's still ego attachment and identification. It is still false. 11:11 doesn't mean everything is all right and it's good. That's good to tell yourself at one level, but as you start reaching these higher levels, you have to put that down, because it's a crutch. It's training wheels. It's training wheels to get you into a consistent state of contentment and gratitude, right? Keep in mind, all these mental things and tricks and shadow work and all the stuff we do, it's a training to keep the soul in a state of contentment and gratitude. But once you learn how to achieve that state without the crutches and training wheels, you have to let the training wheels go. I was doing my meditation outside and I walked upstairs and I saw a mop, right? And the first thing I saw was the handle and it said Mr. Clean. And instantly ego kicked in like, yeah, that's me. I'm Mr. Clean. I'm spotless, right? And while that's a good, pleasant thought, I had to remember, okay, no, actually, no. It's just a mop handle. There's nothing extra to it. I strive to no longer be identified. No longer be identified. Because the truth is not expressed. The truth is unexpressed. The truth is still in potential state. So the more that we're able to identify with potentiality, the closer we are to truth. But the more that we identify with something that is already expressed, the more that we identify with something that is already manifest, we're only locking ourselves into inertia and stagnation. But keep in mind, like I said, it's levels. If you're just coming out of depression, yes, it's necessary to talk yourself up. It's necessary. But once you're up, you can start to let that go. But only when you're ready. This is probably for the future, for people down the line. As Vincent L. Cristol said in the chat, no duality. It's true. So yeah, looking at the empty room, because this is what we're talking about. From Chesed lies the secret path to Doth, which is symbolized by the term the empty room. This implies the facing of absolute reality without the veils of symbols or indeed form of any nature. It is an approach towards the formless verities of the spiritual worlds and involves a complete breaking clear of any previous conceptions and form ties. This is what I'm talking about. And it won't make sense to people at a lower level, but at a higher level, this is the work here. It is said to be a higher and supreme form of the approach towards Tifereth. And in the process, terrible spiritual loneliness can be experienced for all previous conceptions, even of God to have to be dissolved until nothing is left, and the soul feels it is on the point of destruction through isolation. Who can handle that? Like, who can really handle that? Don't be tough for the chat. Just think about it. The empty room means that all notion of form must be dissolved, including your happy thoughts, including your idea of God, or everything's going to work out, or I just saw 11:11, Mercury retrograde. Everything has to be let go at this stage. And if you're already getting scared, then just know you're not at that level yet. No shade, nothing wrong with it, but we're really talking about levels of awareness of reality. Because past that point, all of form is now unexpressed. Every concept is now unexpressed. That's why when you get past that abyss, it is angled differently. What exists there does not exist. What exists here is still in potential state. It's in seed state, right? It's in potential state. The whole mind has to turn inside out and upside down to be able to fluently function at those levels. So again, like I said earlier, for a person working at that level, there really isn't much point to even discuss it because nobody can even relate. So you won't be helping anybody by talking about it. If anything, you'll be hurting people because it doesn't sound so pleasant. But again, that's just my projection of my experience. Yours may be quite different. I don't really care either way, even if so what. 25. Such an account will be of academic interest only to anyone likely to need the services of this book. but it can be imagined that the soul's seeming destruction before assuming the direct powers of the spirit are a higher analog of the fears of the personality approaching the leap across the gulf, and the assumption of the powers of the soul, which cannot be completely believed in until they are experienced. That's another reason why it's pointless to talk about it, because you can't even believe it until you experience it. 26. The grade across the abyss is the Magister Templi of Bina, and such a one is complete master of all the aspects of form at every level. Such a grade is, of course, of immediate interest only to an inner plane adept, for such a grade is not likely to be attained by anyone in incarnation. Similarly, it would be of little point to speculate upon the capacities necessary to attain the much higher grades of magus or epistemists. 27. However, for those interested in getting a sense of proportion with regard to the real significance of grades, The Rays and Initiations by Alice A. Bailey gives the Tibetan master's very full account of the higher grades of initiation. Check that out if this is something that really interests you. If you're really interested in these grades and these levels and what they represent and how to get there, well, maybe not how to get there, but what it's like, The Rays and Initiations by Alice A. Bailey would be a good one to check out. 28. For practical purposes, however, it must always be remembered lower grades are very much matters of function. Also, a grade is only attained when the full powers of a Sephirah have been assimilated. Thus, although Gibra is assigned to the grade of Adeptus Major, an initiate in Gibra is only an Adeptus Minor until he leaves the sphere of Gibra and is well on the way to Chesed initiations. This reminds me of being in the Navy and having to, deal with different ranks and stuff. I'm sure that that's where they got this from. Also, there is much overlapping, for initiates will have balancings of karma to face, which relates primarily to the path between Tifereth and Gibra, justice, long before they have approached even the Tifereth level. 29. It might well be a good thing if all speculations as regards grades were dropped, for there is the very human and erroneous tendency to regard them as badges of rank, which is a complete travesty of the whole purpose and process of initiation. However, it was thought well to include a chapter upon this subject, for the Sephirotic grades have been quite widely published in the past, leading to much ill-informed guesswork, which has tended to be all the more rife simply because any genuine occultist, knowing the complexities and pitfalls involved, usually steers clear of the subject. As a result, an element of mystery has grown up quite needlessly. The mystery is one thing that ought to be dispelled once and for all from the perfectly natural process of spiritual development. Okay. All right. Wonderful. I really enjoy this book, and I am so thrilled that we're almost done. I mean, we're not really ever done, but as we get through this, part 1, we're going right into part 2. And as I had mentioned, part 2, see, I got my bookmark ready and everything. No road is long with good company. Aw, you guys are my good company. Thanks for being so good. So this book here, Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism, Volume 2, on the Paths and the Tarot. This one has quite a few sections. It's slightly longer, but he's going to go over the paths and how they relate to the tarot cards. And with this, we're going to have a supreme and full understanding of the relationships on the tree. A full guide, practical guide to Kabbalistic symbolism. Look, if you've been curious about Kabbalah and you didn't know anything about it, these 2 books should be answering all your questions. Man, oh man. I'm so glad to be doing this because I'm learning something that I did not know before. All right, so let me know if
if you guys enjoyed this reading. I certainly did. And I think it's about time for me to go ahead and clock out. I've been writing all day long. See, I've got this book that I'm working on. This massive solar flare, solar eclipse, every planet dancing in the same party has really brought some creative juice my way, and it's been much appreciated. I've been putting it to good use, that's for sure. I hope you have been too. It's a good day for manifesting things. Alora says now is a very good time for writing. It certainly is. And just got right to it. Just stuff just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing. Hopefully I reach my deadline. I've already got my editor and proofreader, so it's coming along fine. This book is going to be pretty much information at a higher level than what I've been talking about, because honestly, the only way to really get this type of information out is if I actually sit down and write it. You know what I'm saying? If I talk about it, I get kind of limited and sometimes even carried away. But I've noticed that when I sit down and I write these concepts, I'm able to take a concentrated stretch of thought and really expand it all the way. It's been pretty interesting. You're gonna have to. I don't think it's a hard read so far, but it is something you'll have to pay attention to, otherwise you're gonna miss it. It's not to make you feel good. It's not talking about any basic shit that you heard already. I'm very positive that this will be a book that is going to be held in high esteem by people who are serious occultists, because I'm bringing something new to the table. New-ish. There's nothing new under the sun, but the way that it will be delivered and expressed will not be typical. But anyways, you will certainly find out, because I know each and every one of you will get a copy. Good day. Good day. Truly grateful to be alive. Truly grateful just to be. And so concludes the book study. I'm probably going to wake up early tomorrow and do the rest of the book. So if you're up, you might catch me. If not, then we'll do it again later. But either way, tomorrow is Sunday, and you know what that means. I'm going to be going live, and we're going to talk about the last chapter of Gyan Yoga. What a chapter. Filled with information. And if you saw the live, I streamed the reading of it just straight through. It's only 1 hour. Please check that out if you haven't already. Or at least read the book yourself. You know, it's only a few pages. But tomorrow I'm going to do everything I can to start it at 1 p.m. Eastern. Wow, I'm in such a good mood. My favorite student / friend has sent me a care package full of wonderful things. There's like all kinds of sweet smelling candles and a bunch of unicorn stuff and lots of things to smell. So yeah, life is good. Life is good. I hope that you feel love today. I hope that you feel gratitude today. I hope that you're getting some stuff done. I hope you're making yourself proud. And again, value doesn't depend on action and has nothing to do with what you actually do. Value is based on who you are. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? Because when you know who you are, you'll then realize that you don't have to do anything to prove your value or to prove your worth or to earn love. It comes with being. So be the best. Be the best. That's what I tell myself. Be the best. Be perfect. I tell myself that all the time. But as I said earlier, eventually I'll have to stop because I'm just going to be the best and be perfect. Or rather, I will become aware and acknowledge that state which already is inherent within. Life is all about what is expressed, what is unexpressed, and what will never be expressed. Life is the totality of all those things. Consciousness is the awareness of those things at different degrees, different levels. So at what level are you aware of yourself? At what level are you aware of your potentiality? Things to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and clock out. This is TK Trav, aka Travis Magus, here with LVX777. I love you guys. Peace.